Hello, you lovely people. Welcome back to another Genshin Impact video. And today we are here to talk about the Moongazing World Quest. We're going to be doing a deep dive into some theories, the timeline of events, and just discussing overall where this story will lead us in the future. Now, of course, if you guys go on to enjoy this video, smash that like button. But more importantly, let me know in the comment section down below, what did you guys think about the World Quest? Do you have your own theories? And let me know if I've missed out on any theories that you feel is super important that we should talk about, and I will do so in maybe a separate video or reacting to your comments down below. So feel free to put some comments down there as well. It'll be super appreciated. Now, for me, the Moongazing World Quest was one of the best world quests in the game, right? I think by far and away it did so many things that I wanted it to do. For example, talk about the history of Teyvat, the Dragonkin, Nibelung, heavenly principles, all that sort of stuff. We got a lot of information in the world quest, and so for me it hit a lot of the points that I love about Genshin Impact. So for me it is the best world quest, right? And I want to see, of course, if you guys agree or disagree with me on that topic, but I think it's going to be a subjective thing, right? I think it's a very subjective thing. So for me, doing this video was super important. I knew that I wanted to make this video, but I wanted to do it right. So it's the reason why I've actually made a timeline of events as well, so that we can actually talk about when everything happened, to get an idea of where it all began, where it all came to, and where it all ended. Because I think going into the future, especially as we talk about certain topics like the Traveler's Message and all that sort of stuff, knowing when everything happened in this world quest is going to be very important. So stick around. It's going to take a couple of minutes to just go over everything, but I would appreciate if you guys stuck around and got an idea about the timeline of events, because that's where we're going to be starting with. We're going to start off with an estimated timeline of events. Now, if you feel like I've made a mistake, feel free to let me know in the comments. This is what I believe to be the timeline of events. So everybody's gonna have a differing opinion on certain points on when everything happened, because still it was pretty vague in regards to certain situations happening, right? When it happened, how it happened. So let's start off at the very beginning. So Ignalum led the dragon researchers to the moon after Nibelung had headed to the Sea of Stars, aka space, basically, right? He went into deep space. The likes of Ignalum had come to the moon to do some research. Now, the main idea of doing this research was because while they were in the circumlunar zone, they had received a message from deep space, which they believed was from Nibelung. Now, the idea of creating the Eye of Ignalum was because they could not travel to deeper space. Now remember, before everything had begun, before Nibelung had gone into the Sea of Stars and everything, the Voyager had come to Teyvat, right, when Nibelung was still around and everything, saying that the civilization he had created was going to be doomed to be destroyed by the abyss. Now Nibelung refused to take that easily, so he prepared the dragon civilization in terms of technology, in terms of intelligence. He prepared them, he built them up, and obviously came to a point where Nibelung had to travel into the Sea of Stars to get an idea of how he could, find a solution against the abyss, right? That's why we saw Nibelung go into the Sea of Stars. Now, of course, unfortunately, while the dragon researchers and the Dragonkin were technologically advanced, as we've seen through Natlan and, of course, Nordcry, they still weren't capable of traveling to deeper space safely and securely to the point where they could go, come back in one piece. As such, they built the Eye of Ignalum, a transceiver station, to recapture and also transfer and send out signals. While they tried to obviously receive the signal and, try and contact it once again, the signal never reappeared. Ignalum, in the meantime, died while waiting, but prior to his passing, he had noticed a celestial body/star. This is where things get very interesting, because it could point towards maybe the heavenly principles arriving to Teyvat upon the morning star. And if this is the case, of course, the Traveler's Message's timing becomes a little bit up in the air, right? But we will talk about this later on. This is the records left in the terminal. Observations of the intermittently visible celestial body indicate a tenuous atmosphere on its surface. No signs of life activity have been detected so far, though parts of its surface structures do not appear to be naturally formed. Although I have expelled the Oathbreaker Ungin from the team, his lunar biosphere work and nearby test sites may still be useful for landing on that star. But let's not dwell on him. May the Creator be forever crowned with supreme glory. We shall journey towards the stars as we once gazed upon the moon from the earth. Recorded by Ignalum. Okay, so that is point number 1. That is effectively the Ignalum saga. Effectively, right? Very straightforward, very easy to cover, right? Following the passing of Ignalum, his students over time gave up and no longer used the eye as a transceiver and used it to instead monitor the moon so that they could conduct further lunar research. However, they did receive a signal one day, to which Ungin, one of Ignalum's colleagues at the time, boarded the Moongazer and set out to deep space towards the coordinates from where the signal was received. Now remember, at this point they still were not confident whether or not Ungin would be able to come back and complete a full round trip. He did come into contact with a database life form in deep space, a black stellar matter, and then he fused with it to bypass the language barrier. This gave Ungin a chance to decipher the message, and he identified it as the final message that our guest civilization sent out to the stars. Years later, when Maggie's, Ungin's life partner and colleague, was leading the researchers on the moon, the space life form capture station was suddenly rammed by a cloaked space station. Let's go over there so I can show it to you guys. I think that'll be the best way to go about it, right? It was suddenly rammed by a cloaked spaceship. And this, of course, was something critical. This was something very, very critical. Because it was the Moongazer, the ship that Ungin had left on. Now, you might be wondering, what did he deliver? What was the message he delivered? Was he able to deliver a message? Remember, he was fused with the black life body matter. This was something that Magis and the others were not expecting whatsoever. And as a result, they were trying to still decipher the message, and then they realized there was a message able to be deciphered from Ungin. Unfortunately, Ungin was beginning to die. Let's talk about the message first and then talk about him passing away. A single ray of light is feeble, easily swallowed by darkness, but as long as another light shines before it can fade, then one day there will surely come a ray of light that pierces the night like dawn. Project Moongazer was created in the first place to send this kind of message back out into the universe. But the issue with calling out into the darkness is that the universe may not always be safe. There might be a threat that receives this message and realizes that there is yet another target for them to attack. As such, the Dragon researchers began working on a defensive mechanism called the Lunar Whale. Magis, a life sciences expert, used a technique that was very rough and experimental on Ungin that allowed him to become a life form composed of pure ancient moon energy. Now remember, the other researchers were primarily focused on this threat, but Magis, obviously being Ungin's life partner, wanted to obviously figure out a way to protect him, and thereby she transformed him into a Kuhenki. While she was able to save his body and created Unji, the first artificially birthed Kuhenki on the moon, his consciousness was lost in the process. He had no memories, he had no knowledge of himself. He was basically reborn completely from fresh, albeit with the idea that he was originally and once upon a time Ungin. From there, she devoted her time and research to learn more about this new life form, and in the meantime, learn more about the nature of the astral being that Ungin had fused with. This allowed Magis to lay the foundation upon which the Kuhenki in Project Moongazer was born. Lusalim, a student of Magis and Ungin, was working with Magis on Project Lunar Whale, which was a critical component of Moongazer. The laboratory where working on Lunar Whale was part of a grand project to hide the moon. He worked and tested upon it by creating in it a minor iteration effectively on Ungean Circle. And this success is what led to him creating and working on the second phase, which was making a massive generator which could hide the entirety of the moon in the lab. Let's go over to said lab. Researcher Noor had stated, if we go over here and take a look at the terminal, right? Because we can read a little bit of this information in more detail. So I think it's this one. Not this one. Wrong one. Wrong one. Whoopsie. This one. If we go over here, it is phase 1. There we go. Researcher Noor suggested that we conduct project trials on a larger scale within the biosphere. I had thought he took no interest in anything other than the stones and the dead. Still, Professor Majis agreed, so we proceeded with it. When she asked me for a project name, I suggested Project Lunar Veil, a veil that could obscure the moon. It was a fitting name, but no one would have ever guessed it actually came from Ninin. It is truly astonishing. When we were testing the curtain form black body containment, Ninin could barely even speak. Yet when the indistinct words Lunar Veil tumbled from her lips, it was as those innocent eyes had already understood what we were doing. It felt as if she too had come for this very purpose. Perhaps in the future, she would become a remarkable researcher in her own right. As Majis grew older and her lifespan came to an end, Lusalim then used the same technique and method that she used on Ungean as per her request. Unfortunately, her consciousness was also not preserved. Another transmission was then sent out on her behalf and her final wish as well. Phase 1 was a success. We created a miniature lunar veil to shroud the biosphere, but it only made me more anxious. Professor Majis' condition continued to decline. The incident inflicted severe psychological trauma, leaving her mental state increasingly unstable. Her ongoing work is rapidly depleting her vitality, and she has no longer the luxury of time. The research team from the Eye of Ignalum carried out a signal transmission for this purpose. I could neither bring myself to, nor truly had the right to, stop Professor Majis' final wish, even if that wish did not truly come from her. I remain deeply uneasy about this transmission. The only thing left for me to do is to pray that our king, who ventured into the depths of stars, and hope that this transmission does not invite evil or disaster. Next, I had to finish the full-scale veil immediately. Even though it required an energy supply several orders of magnitude greater than Phase 1, I didn't know if the moon goddesses were willing to shed their mercy upon me, but they were the only ones I had left to turn to. Lusalim then inherited, of course, the message the creature from space transmitted to the dragons, but before the veil could actually take shape, an entity from beyond had pierced it. This entity came from beyond the stars. The device went haywire, the laboratory exploded, and all came to nothing. The new being / entity, presumed highly to be the heavenly principles, had not been anticipated, but it had changed the course of the dragon researchers and indirectly Teyvat's future. Lusalim had designed the lunar whale as a crucial part of Project Moongazer, but it had to be suspended. Lusalim didn't perish. His research survived by striking a bargain with the new entity, and using the fruits of his research, he followed the ruler of the heavens. As we know now, the heavenly principles then used this technique to create a veil not just for the moon, but for the entirety of Teyvat. Now, in between all of this, we also had some other cutscenes happen that came after the events of Project Moongazer. We saw them after the world quest was complete. We saw 3 additional scenes featuring the 3 Moon Sisters, who had discussed the entrance and arrival of the outsider, aka the heavenly principles, and how their approach was dictated upon what Nibelung had told them. Outsiders should be welcome, and that their main task was to A, protect the world, and B, to ensure that there would be no ill intent coming from any guests. And of course, at the time, There was no ill intent from the heavenly principles, so they allowed the heavenly principles to stay. However, in each of the scenes we saw, starting from the one in Bubble World all the way over here, you can access one down here in the Bubble Pool, not Bubble World, Bubble Pool. The second scene being in Golden Hall, and the final one being at the Nur Stone Circle. Once you are able to finish off all the exploration, you see the third and final scene. And in all scenes, it slowly evolves, where you learn that the heavenly principles is changing things. He's doing things that doesn't make any sense, to the point where Sonnet is completely against it, and then the other two sisters are still on the side of neutrality, trying to understand what is exactly happening and trying to figure out, when it all settles, when the dust settles, Teyvat should still be safe. This was like watching a car crash, to be quite honest. Before I continue on with the timeline of events, I genuinely felt like this was a car crash I was watching, and I knew that the end result was going to result in everybody dying except for the perpetrator. It felt, you felt that dread build up into you, that chill build up into you. Now, in the meantime, Lusaline, we go back to him, of course, at the end of it all, left Ninin with one final task. This final task, of course, involved a very simple situation, right? And that was to carry on the research, for one, and two, to ensure that the people of... one second, we go over here, this one specifically. To continue sending out that message in a safe and secure manner. Let's go over here and read this terminal, because this third part is very important. And third, I am grateful for you, Ninin. Ninin, you didn't come to the stars, into this world the way we did. You are a true child of the stars. So that kind of leads me to believe that Ninin was one of the researchers that was probably born on the moon itself. That is why I now entrust Project Moongazer, now only one step away from completion, to you. And that final step is life, information, and memory must be given a way to be inherited and to circulate. The power of the moon's origin, granted to us by the moon goddesses, is enough to make this possible. I will not live to see this project completed, for I have sinned against dragonkind. I capitulated to that terrifying sovereign who was not of this world, and surrendered the precious results of our research, and I do not intend to escape judgment. But you know very well why I made that choice. You know what it was for, and I had my own mission to fulfill. Now I believe in you more than anyone. I believe you can finish walking the rest of the road none of us could. From now on, everything that follows, I place in your hands. I hope that when I am gone, I can journey into the sea of stars. There, I would leave behind a few drops of tears, like cups of wine raised in tribute to my teachers. Then I would gather a few stars and set them beneath the curtain of night to form a single line that says, "The dragons were here." All the researchers who had once explored the starry sky had then had their data merged into the lunar sea. By the will of the moon, they were then reborn at some point in the future in a form akin to Eggies. They instinctively consumed each other to acquire more data until the mission became clear in their minds. That they will walk the journey once more, come to the eye of Ibn Balum once again, and from there, they will learn everything. They will use themselves as keys to open the Moongazer module in the Eye of Ibn Balum and resend the message out into the universe, and then they will return to the circle of life. In Ninin's era, at the time, the world was already teetering on the brink of destruction due to the conflict between the two supreme beings. These supreme beings, of course, probably being Nibelung and the heavenly principles, and that being the war of funerary flames. That is the timeline of events. Like I said, this is a working timeline of events, of course, right? Things can develop, we might learn more exact points in time, and of course, we will learn in the future probably as to when that message exactly was sent by the traveler to Teyvat, right? Because we still don't know when that message was sent exactly. We just know that it was some sealed data. Now, based on the timeline, right, with the celestial body, I personally, it's a, like I said in the timeline of events, right, my working theory is that that celestial body may be the heavenly principles. What percentage do I think that's the case? Around 20 to 30%. I don't think it's a guarantee that that's the case, to be honest, right? I don't think it's a guarantee that that's the case, to be honest. But if it is, and let's theorize if it is, right, then our theory regarding the traveler's AI being the heavenly principles doesn't necessarily make sense, right? Because we would have had that signal or message potentially come during that time. What I believe this message came probably would have been around the time when the heavenly principles was able to control the dragons. I think that's when the message came. That's why it was sealed. I personally believe that to be the case. Now, I could be wrong here, and the game might be able to prove me wrong in that situation, and we're getting our timelines mixed up potentially. But if that is assuming the heavenly principles is the celestial body that obviously Ignalum is referring in this specific terminal. Now, I do think, personally, I will say this, I do think that the traveler's message was sent when the heavenly principles came. I do believe that. And I do think that the heavenly principles must have encrypted the message in some way, shape, or form to make it sealed immediately when it came here. That's my other theory as well, is that I don't think that message was read by anybody. Clearly, nobody had read it. If somebody had read it, then somebody in one of these terminals would have made a mention of, we had a message from these guys. And not to mention, they would have probably referred to a sealed message as well, potentially as well, right? The fact that nobody saw this message just adds to the theory that somebody blocked that message from even being opened by anybody. Nobody was able to read it. So clearly there is something on that front. All right. The thing is, I don't know where to begin because there's just so many theories to start with. So I think we'll start off with basically the lunar veil. So what is pretty evident, and I think this theory is, I think, a confirmed theory at this point. I think we can't call it a theory anymore, but Project Lunar Veil, right, the veil that Lusalim built, I think is now effectively and 100% confirmed to be a to be utilized by the heavenly principles for the fall sky, the firmament that we see around Teyvat. And what is quite interesting, to be honest, more so than anything else, right, is what is the heavenly principles and why have they come is the bigger question, right? So they've pierced the lunar veil that Lusalim and the others were trying to make around the moon, right? So clearly they wanted something, right? It isn't a coincidence that I don't think it would have been a coincidence that they just came and, just as they were preparing to, close up the moon, they attacked the moon. I don't think that was the case. There has to be something more. I think there may have been a situation where the heavenly principles knew that Teyvat existed and they were avoiding a situation where Teyvat would hide itself, right? I think that is a very integral point to make. I think the messages that, of course, Ignalum and the others kept sending out willy-nilly, like just, in terms of just sending as many messages as possible, hoping that Nibelung would get it, I think they all failed to realize until much later that the world isn't as empty as they thought. The universe isn't as empty as they thought. And that, I think, was a critical failure on the Dragonkind's part. I think that is the big reason why the heavenly principles was able to come. And the real question is, right, you could argue and say, was Teyvat lucky that the heavenly principles came first? Now, honestly speaking, reading everything that the heavenly principles has done, with the Moon Sisters and also, the dragon researchers and everything that they did on Teyvat with the celestial nails and everything, they're evil, right? We know that they're evil in a way where maybe they are not acknowledging they're doing it for the greater of humanity or the greater of the people they have made. And these rules that they've created, they have to follow them so that they're all safe. I'd still say they're evil. No matter what anybody says, they're still evil for what they've done, right? They may not acknowledge it's evil, but it is evil. The real question is, right, is do you think they're still lucky that they got the message and not, say, somebody on the Abyss side or whatever it may be, right? Because that could also be determined and clear that that could have been a problem as well, right? We know that Nibelung had gone into space to find a solution against the Abyss. We know that the Abyss was already, taking over, destroying other planets, right? And so it is a major plot point and maybe something that might come up in the future that, the heavenly principles will use as a sort of defense against, his crimes, basically saying, I did it to protect Teyvat, right? It's a very difficult one. It's a very, very difficult one. That theory is a very interesting one in which, whether or not theory, but that question, was the heavenly principles coming actually a good thing for Teyvat? It's a very interesting one. Now, another theory I have, and like I say, all of these are just working theories, and this is probably one of my more far-fetched theories, but what if hypothetically, right, we still don't know when the heavenly principles really started coming into the picture when it came to Teyvat, right? Obviously, I proposed that potentially it might have been the celestial body that, Ignalum was referring to in his first terminal recording. But what if the heavenly principles first learned of Teyvat, not via any message particularly that obviously Teyvat sent, but by a being returning to Teyvat? What if Unjin, he fused with a black body life matter, right? A life matter that was data-based. And the theory that we're working with for so very long is that Phanes, or the heavenly principles, is AI, a database. Is it possible that because of the black body life form fusing with Unjin, being able to travel back to Teyvat, of course, with said life form, gave the heavenly principles an opportunity to identify the existence and confirm that there is a place like Teyvat, which would be the perfect location for them to settle their base and, of course, create the population, the civilizations that they want, the rules they want? I think that could be very interesting because I feel like a lot of people kind of just glossed over that. It's something that I was like, wait a second, they're calling it a database life form like 2 or 3 times, of course, and they've regularly mentioned it, and it's not impossible that that might be the case. Now, the universe is a vast space, it could be that this black body life form is from another place entirely and the heavenly principles from another place entirely, right? But it's not an impossibility either, right? It would be a major coincidence, of course, right, that is the case. But I think that could be a very interesting theory if it turns out to be the case, that it wasn't actually any of the messages or anybody. It was actually one of their own going out and on command fusing with the black body life form. Because remember, the black body life form did give a message, talking about the darkness and everything once again, right? And all of that sort of stuff, right? Once again, it's not, obviously the people of Teyvat knew that thanks to Nibelung, and obviously the outer worlds knew that because the Abyss was obviously encroaching and destroying so many other planets as well. So it's not like both parties didn't know that, but the heavenly principles obviously would also know about that. So it is a very interesting theory. I personally think it would kind of bang, to be honest, but now I don't know if that actually, is like a 100%. For me, I would put that on like a 3 out of 10 belief rating, to be honest. I'm not too confident in it. These theories are like, I'm spitballing these theories for the most part. I don't know if any of them will stick necessarily. I personally don't believe they will stick, but it's fun. This is what I find a lot of fun. Now, the other topic I have in mind is, of course, we know the Voyager came to Teyvat. So there is at least one individual who knew about the existence of Teyvat, right? What if the Heavenly Principles planned everything from the very beginning? What if the Voyager was a sort of envoy for the Heavenly Principles to, basically ensure that plan would work? What if the reason why Nibelung even left is because of the Heavenly Principles? Now, it's a bit of a stretch. I will admit that now that is, I think, the biggest stretch I could possibly come up with, to be honest, right? I'm not one who, I think that's like a straight 1 out of 10. It is a straight 1 out of 10 for me personally, in terms of like how much I believe in that point. But Sotervoinen, right? We know he was a Voyager from the Sea of Stars, and he was able to sense the presence of Nibelung on Teyvat, and especially considering he was so powerful, Nibelung, right? But what if in, we know based on the books and all from we've read and everything in Hyperborea and all that sort of jazz, that that he woke up because of Nibelung, and he wanted to warn the dragon of Teyvat's inevitable destruction. But I still think that there is more to that story. I feel like there's a little bit more to the fact than just, the Voyager was meditating and then, just was like, oh my god, Nibelung is so strong kind of thing. I don't know. I feel like there's a little bit more to that. And then, of course, we know that Sotervoinen also visited Teyvat once more, came over to see if Nibelung was there, but Nibelung was gone. The Heavenly Principles was there and refused to disturb the Heavenly Principles as well, while still being confused. And then, of course, they had the whole situation with Koitar and everything, and they were separated, right? I think there's a little bit more to that story. I feel like there's a little bit more to that story. I feel like the Heavenly Principles, there is a small part of me that feels like the Heavenly Principles may have been involved with Sotervoinen's discovery of Nibelung and generally, pushing that plan along slowly but surely. It's not impossible. And I feel like, of course, one of the reasons why we had that whole situation with Koitar happen is because obviously the Voyager came to the notice of the shades of the Heavenly Principles, and by the Heavenly Principles' own rules, it makes sense, of course, as to why that happened. And of course, the Heavenly Principles also woke up at the time, and then they realized, oh, wait a second, this ain't working, man. This ain't happening. I'm about to punish you. I feel like there's got to be something there. There's got to be something there. Now, the final one that I have in terms of theories, right? And this is a bit of a... I think this is going to be very likely, to be honest. I really do believe that this is very, very likely, just based on everything we've seen so far that the Heavenly Principles has done, right? I genuinely believe that Celestia, at one point, was the home of the dragons. I don't think that it was made by... I don't think it was made by the Heavenly Principles only. I think they've taken it. I think just like they took the Irminsul, just like they took the Lunar Veil, the technology and everything, I think Celestia would have been there around the time of the dragons as well. I think this would have been Nibelung's original home, to be honest. I really do believe that to be the case. This is my theory as well. And I feel like this is my theory that I think is going to be a straight 7 or 8 out of 10. Has to be the case. I refuse to believe otherwise. Based on just what I know, what we know about the Heavenly Principles and how colonist they've been, basically, I think is the best way to put it. They've been very colonist. The colonialism in them is very, very strong. I think they've colonized even Celestia as well, to be honest. I really, really do believe that to be the case. Now, obviously, these are my theories, right? I've gone over my theories, talked about, the Traveler's Message, the time that would have taken place in, the question of when did the heavenly principles first appear? That'll affect, of course, the traveler's message. I think I gave differing theories about that whole point. I'm curious to see what you guys have to say in terms of what that might be the situation, what situation that might be about in terms of the traveler and all. Now, the question, and we went over the black body life form, went over the HP's plans, if this was planned from way before as well, even before Nibelung left Teyvat, and obviously Celestia. I have a lot of questions as well. And of course, if you have theories regarding these questions as well, feel free to let me know in the comments as well, right? But I think we've come out of it. Definitely, I feel like we've got some answers, right? In regards to, of course, the level of intelligence the dragon researchers had, the idea of how, one, the traveler was able to come to Teyvat, and two, the heavenly principles came to Teyvat potentially, and generally, even more so, the idea that many more might come to Teyvat as well. But like I said, we have questions that need answering still, and the first one is the simplest one and the most obvious one: the traveler's message. We need a full-on answer for that. That is the most important topic, I think, coming out of the story, right? It was what happened. Why was the message sealed? Why was nobody able to read it? Did it come in between the time when the heavenly principles basically eviscerated all the dragon researchers and there was none left on the moon, thereby the message just remaining sealed and hidden away for eternity, basically? Or was it before the dragon researchers were there and something prevented the message from going completely and securely open to the dragon researchers? Number two, what is the HP's actual motive, right? Like, don't get me wrong, we know it is to identify a suitable world for a civilization that they want to take place in humans, of course. And that there is obviously an element of creating rules and effectively ideas so that, the abyss won't infiltrate in any way, shape, or form in Teyvat. But what is there anything more to that, right? There has got to be a motive. There has to be something behind the heavenly principles that's causing this. A civilization behind the abyss, potentially, maybe the humans of old created the heavenly principles, the AI behind it, or the database behind it, to ensure that their future generations would be safe, akin to what we saw in the Traveler's spaceship, of course, right? Regarding effectively having a arc ship, effectively having the DNA, the embryos of a future civilization, potentially, right? What is the actual link, if there is any, between the traveler and heavenly principles? Again, similar to the first 2 points, I think the first 2 points combine into this third point. Is there any link? Once one of those two get answered, probably the third one gets answered there. What other life forms are there? And is there one that will actually receive Eggy's message that we sent out at the end? Because if there is one, who or what will it be? Will it be good, bad? We know the likes of Sir Telogi is traveling outside the firmament, right? We know that there is the Voyager out there as well, without any memories or anything of that sort. We know that Sir Telogi and Skirk are trying to look for him. There is a good chance we might find him, and of course that'll probably be a story we'll see at the end of it all come together, right? And then finally, will we see the moon being utilized once again? Because of course the moon has still so much technology that, the likes of the Natlan people, might be able to utilize it in some way, shape, or form. Of course, with Phlogiston and everything, along with even just generally other researchers that we know on Teyvat, they might be able to utilize this in some way, shape, or form that might be to their benefit, that might help them in the fight, in the inevitable fight, I should say, against the heavenly principles and the shades. I think these are going to be very interesting questions that will inevitably, I feel, get answered for sure. But to me personally, I think this story, just generally, more than anything else, left me very excited, very anticipatory. Is that even a word? Anticipatory. it left me wanting more. It left me anticipating more. And like I said, I think I've had a lot of fun coming up with some of these theories. And I wanted to kind of go a little bit balls to the walls with these theories, to be honest, because I didn't want it to be simple theories, to be honest. And I wanted to kind of, more than anything else, also set up a timeline of events, see if these timeline of events is right, to be honest, because I feel like more than anything else, right, it's all about kind of identifying when everything happened, because from when everything happened you can try and question how everything happened, right? And then from there you can also see what happened, when, what, and then you can question who, when, whom, sort of thing. Basically, these questions need to be answered so that you can then set up theories in the future. That's the idea behind this. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments. I know I kind of blabbered a little bit towards the end there, felt I was you know, blah blah blahing a bit more, to be honest. But like I said, it's difficult to say in words how special, you know, having a very in-depth story is, right? We experience it a lot in various RPGs, and you know, the likes of, you know, be it, you know, Final Fantasy, Personas, your you know, Trails of Sky, your Tales of etc, etc, right? You've got so many of these beautiful in-depth RPGs that contain some amazing stories and some amazing theories and lores of itself. And while I do agree to an extent that yes, Genshin's story may not be as strong as many of these potentially, I still feel it's got a very solid set of writing where it leaves you looking forward to more, where it leaves you predicting what's going to be coming up next. And there is a lot to discuss, a lot to talk about. So in my opinion, I feel like a lot of people kind of undervalue and underrate Genshin's story when it just has so much in store for us, you know. And I cannot wait to see what's next. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you guys have a lovely rest of your evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you may be. And like I said, in the comment section down below, I want to see what you guys have to say. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.